A father and daughter took a highway trip in 1991, 28 years later, a buried car told. It was the summer of 1991 when Emily and her father, Daniel, set off on a road trip across the vast, open roads of the American Midwest. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow on the landscape as they packed their things into their old 1985 Chevrolet Impala. The car, though a bit worn and rusty, had been with them through thick and thin. It was more than just a vehicle. It was their constant companion, the one thing that had stayed steady through the years, no matter what. Daniel, a man in his early 40s, was a mechanic by trade. He had worked hard all his life, putting in long hours in the garage, fixing cars, and earning just enough to get by. He had never been one for extravagant luxuries, but he always made sure Emily had everything she needed. Emily, on the other hand, was 12 years old, a girl full of curiosity and wonder. She loved books and spent hours reading stories about faraway lands and exciting adventures, but most of her life had been confined to the small town they lived in. They had talked about taking a trip for years, but between Daniel's long work hours and Emily's school schedule, it had never seemed like the right time. But now, with Emily about to enter high school, Daniel knew it was time. He wanted to take her somewhere special, a place where they could be alone together without the distractions of work, school, or the pressures of daily life. The car, packed with clothes, snacks, and a stack of maps, rumbled to life as Daniel turned the key in the ignition. Emily slid into the passenger seat, excited but nervous about the journey ahead. She had never been on a trip this long before, and the idea of spending several days on the road made her both anxious and thrilled. The car's engine hummed steadily as they pulled out of their driveway and headed down the road, leaving behind the familiar streets of their small town. For the first time in a long while, there was a sense of freedom in the air. It wasn't just the open road or the horizon stretching out ahead of them. It was the feeling of possibility, of escape. It was as if the world was theirs to explore, to take on together. Emily couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so close to her father. There was a bond between them that had always been there, but it was often buried beneath the day-to-day routine of life. This trip, she hoped, would be different. It would be a chance for both of them to reconnect and create memories that would last a lifetime. As they drove, they passed through small towns with quirky names, each with its own charm and stories to tell. Daniel would point out old landmarks, sharing tales from his own childhood, while Emily listened intently, eager to learn more about the man who had raised her. They stopped at roadside diners for greasy burgers and fries, laughing over inside jokes that only the two of them understood. Emily's nerves began to ease as she realized just how much fun they were having, and how much she truly enjoyed her father's company. The road stretched on endlessly, the landscape changing as they moved further from home. The fields turned into rolling hills, the sky wide and open. They talked about everything and nothing, stories from Daniel's past, dreams about the future, and the places they wanted to visit someday. Emily could see the spark in her father's eyes, the way he looked at the road as if it held the answers to all his questions. One afternoon, as they were driving through the outskirts of a small town, they came across a strange little place, a sort of roadside attraction, nestled among the dry grass and scattered rocks. It was a small area filled with old, rusted cars, abandoned and forgotten. There were no signs, no explanations, just a collection of vehicles slowly decaying in the harsh sunlight. "Why don't we stop here?" Daniel suggested with a grin, turning the steering wheel and pulling the Impala off the highway. Emily was intrigued, her curiosity piqued by the sight of the abandoned cars. As they stepped out of the car, the air was dry and still, the only sound the distant hum of the highway. They wandered among the old vehicles, peering into windows, touching the faded paint, and imagining the stories these cars might tell if they could talk. "Could you imagine burying a car like this just to leave a piece of you behind?" Daniel asked, half joking, as he inspected a particularly dilapidated old truck. Emily laughed, the idea seeming ridiculous but also oddly intriguing. What would it be like, she wondered, to leave something behind in such a permanent way, as a way of marking a moment in time? "I don't know, Dad," she said, smiling. "Maybe we should bury our Impala so we can come back and find it someday." Daniel chuckled, the idea seeming even more absurd now. "Yeah, right. We'd be long gone before that car ever saw the light of day again. But it's a nice thought." They spent a few more minutes exploring the junkyard before getting back in the Impala. As they pulled back onto the highway, the moment seemed to drift away like the dust behind them. But Emily couldn't shake the thought of what her father had said. Maybe it was a joke, but part of her thought there was something more to it. A desire to hold on to something, to mark their place in the world in a way that would last forever. The rest of the journey was peaceful, filled with more quiet conversations and moments of connection. They didn't talk much about the buried car, but the thought of it lingered in the back of Emily's mind, like a little secret between her and her father. It was an idea that, at the time, seemed like nothing more than a playful comment. But as the miles passed by, the connection between them grew stronger, and the car, old, worn, and dependable, became a symbol of their journey. It wasn't just a road trip anymore. It was an experience that would stay with them forever, no matter where life took them. As the day turned to night, they found a small motel to spend the night. The neon sign outside buzzed softly, casting a dim light over the parking lot. They ate dinner at a nearby diner, a small, cozy spot with old wooden tables and checkered floors. It felt like another world, far from their daily lives, and Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of peace. For the first time, she truly understood why her father had wanted to take this trip. It wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about making memories, about holding on to the little moments that made life worth living. As they lay in their motel room, Emily drifted off to sleep, her mind full of the adventures they had shared so far. She couldn't wait to see where the road would take them next. And little did she know, those memories, those simple, shared moments, would become some of the most important of her life. As the road trip continued, the days seemed to melt together into a blur of blue skies, endless highways, and quiet moments shared between father and daughter. The Impala hummed steadily beneath them as they drove, each mile bringing them further from their everyday lives. Emily had never felt so free, and there was something comforting about the rhythm of the road, the constant hum of the tires against the pavement. It was as if the world outside the car didn't matter. It was just the two of them, on an adventure, far from the pressures of work, school, and everything else. Daniel, her father, was a man of few words, but the few words he did speak held weight. He was a quiet man, his emotions often hidden behind a stoic exterior. But on this trip, he seemed different. He was lighter, more open, and Emily could sense that he was happy, not just because of the trip, but because of the time they were spending together. It was a rare gift, something he hadn't been able to give her before. He had always worked long hours, his hands stained with grease, and his mind preoccupied with bills, repairs, and the never-ending cycle of life. But now, on this road trip, he was fully present, and Emily couldn't help but notice how much that meant to her. They stopped at a small, picturesque town one afternoon. The streets were lined with charming old houses, and the air smelled of fresh bread from a local bakery. They parked the Impala on a quiet street, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting a golden light over the town. It was the kind of place Emily had read about in books, a place that seemed to be frozen in time, untouched by the hustle and bustle of the modern world. "Let's explore," Daniel suggested, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Emily's eyes lit up, eager to see what the town had to offer. They wandered down the streets, window shopping at the small boutiques, admiring the old architecture and stopping to take pictures by the town square fountain. They found a small diner, its neon sign flickering softly in the twilight, and decided to grab a bite to eat. Sitting across from her father at the booth, Emily couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. His face, though weathered by years of hard work, was softer now. There were lines around his eyes, but they were the kind of lines that came from years of laughter and thoughtful silence. His smile, though rare, was genuine, and Emily found herself smiling back at him without thinking. She realized that, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a child who needed to be taken care of. She felt like his equal, someone he could share his thoughts and stories with. As they ate, Daniel began to open up in a way he hadn't before. He talked about his childhood, about growing up in a small town not much different from the one they were in now. He told Emily stories about his own father, a man who had worked even harder than Daniel had, who had taught him the value of hard work, but also the importance of taking time to enjoy life's small pleasures. "Your grandfather," Daniel said, "never stopped working, but he always made sure to take a day off every now and then. He would take us out fishing or for a picnic. Those days were the best. Emily listened intently, fascinated by the stories her father shared. She had heard bits and pieces of them over the years, but hearing them in this context, on a quiet afternoon in a small town, made them seem even more meaningful. She realized how little she had known about her father's past, how much there was to learn. And as she listened, she began to see him not just as the man who had raised her, but as a person in his own right, someone with dreams, memories, and a life that didn't revolve solely around her. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time, Emily felt like she was really getting to know her father. She shared more about herself too, about the things that worried her, her hopes for the future, and her dreams of traveling the world. Daniel listened patiently, offering advice and encouragement, but never trying to tell her what to do. It was a new kind of relationship, one where they weren't just father and daughter, but two people sharing their lives with each other. As the sun began to set, they walked back to the Impala, content and full from their meal. The night air was cool, and the stars had started to twinkle in the sky above. Emily felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if the world had slowed down, allowing her to fully appreciate the moment. She could hear the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of the highway, but it all seemed so far away. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet, steady presence of her father by her side. They continued on their journey, stopping at small towns and diners, taking detours to explore hidden corners of the country. With each passing day, Emily felt herself growing closer to her father, not just because of the time they spent together, but because of the things they were learning about each other. It wasn't just about the places they visited. It was about the moments they shared, the laughter, the quiet talks, and the shared understanding that had always existed between them but had never been fully realized. One evening, as they sat on the hood of the Impala, watching the sunset over a wide, open field, Daniel turned to Emily with a serious look in his eyes. "You know, Em," he said quietly, "sometimes I think we get so caught up in our lives that we forget to really live. It's easy to get lost in the routine, in the work, in the things we have to do. But days like this, these are the ones that matter. These are the moments that make life worth living." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with affection for her father. She had always known he loved her, but now she understood the depth of that love in a way she never had before. The trip wasn't just a chance to see new places. It was a chance to reconnect, to rediscover each other, and to create memories that would last long after the journey had ended. As the days passed and the miles rolled by, Emily began to realize something else as well. This trip, this time together, was a gift. She had never known how much she had needed it until now. She had always taken her father for granted, assuming that their relationship would always be there, always steady. But now she understood that relationships, like everything else, needed time and attention to thrive. And this trip, this adventure, was the time they needed to grow closer, to rediscover what they had almost lost. By the time they reached their final destination, Emily wasn't just excited to have completed the trip. She was thankful for the time they had shared, the lessons they had learned, and the bond they had strengthened. It wasn't just about the places they had seen. It was about the people they had become in the process. And in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but remember the moment at the old junkyard, the one where her father had jokingly suggested burying the Impala. The thought seemed so silly at the time, but now, as she looked at the car and the road that had brought them here, she realized that it wasn't such a bad idea after all. Maybe one day they would bury the car, not just to mark the journey, but to remember that sometimes the most important memories are the ones we make along the way. After the road trip came to an end, life gradually returned to its usual pace. The memories of the long days on the road, filled with laughter, stories, and moments of silence, began to feel like distant echoes. Emily had returned to her normal routine of school and extracurricular activities, while her father, Daniel, went back to working long hours at the garage, fixing cars, and keeping the family business afloat. The car, the Impala, was parked in the garage, a reminder of their adventure. It sat there, quietly rusting, just as their connection had started to settle back into the rhythms of daily life. Emily grew older, and so did Daniel. The years passed quickly, and with each passing year it seemed that their time together grew more limited. Emily went off to college, moving to a different city, eager to start her new life. She had big plans, dreams of becoming a writer, of exploring the world, of making a name for herself. She was excited to be independent, to carve out her own space in the world. The Impala, once a symbol of adventure and connection, now seemed like a relic of the past, something that belonged to a time that felt increasingly far away. At first, she would call her father every week, sharing stories about school, her new friends, and her growing ambitions. But as the months went by, those calls became less frequent. Emily became more caught up in her own world, studies, friends, and new experiences. And her father, while still a constant presence in her life, seemed to fade into the background. The once close relationship began to fray. Emily knew that her father loved her, but life had become so busy that there were fewer opportunities to connect. The trips to visit home became less frequent, and when she did visit, the time seemed to fly by in a blur of catching up and small talk. Daniel, too, found himself becoming distant. The years had worn on him, both physically and emotionally. His once strong frame had begun to show signs of age, and his hands, which had once been quick and steady as they worked on cars, were now stiff and worn. He still worked long hours at the garage, but there was a heaviness in his movements, a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He missed the days when Emily was still around, when they had shared their lives more openly. He knew she was growing up, finding her own way, but there was a part of him that wished things could go back to the way they were. The Impala, the car that had carried them on their road trip, sat in the garage, a symbol of those days that seemed to slip further and further away. Daniel hadn't driven it much since the trip. It had become something of a relic, something to remember the past but not something to use in the present. Occasionally, he would open the garage door, start the car, and let it run for a few minutes just to keep the engine from seizing up. But it was never the same. The car wasn't just a mode of transportation. It was a reminder of a time when life had been simpler, when he and Emily had been closer. As the years passed, Emily's visits became even rarer. She would call, but the conversations felt like they were stretched thin, filled with polite questions about work and school. There was no longer the easy flow of conversation they had once shared on their road trip. The bond between them, once so strong, seemed to be slipping away, and neither of them knew how to bring it back. Emily was caught up in her own life, her own dreams, and Daniel was content to let her go, believing it was just part of the natural course of life. After all, he had raised her to be independent, to chase her dreams. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. One evening, as Daniel sat in his living room, watching the news and sipping on a cup of coffee, he found himself thinking back to the road trip. He remembered the days on the highway, the endless stretches of open road, the laughter, and the quiet moments of connection. He remembered how close he had felt to Emily, how they had shared their lives in a way that felt real, unburdened by the weight of the world. He thought about how much time had passed since then, how much had changed. He wondered if Emily remembered those days as fondly as he did. He went out to the garage that night, almost on impulse. The Impala was still parked there, covered in dust, the once bright paint now faded and chipped. He ran his hand over the hood, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. The car had been a constant in his life, a companion through thick and thin. And yet it had become more of a memory than a reality. He didn't know what to do with it anymore. Maybe it was time to let go, to move on from the past, but part of him didn't want to. He opened the door to the driver's seat and sat down, his hands gripping the steering wheel for the first time in years. The car smelled the same, old leather, gasoline, and the faint scent of dust. It felt familiar, comforting. For a moment he closed his eyes, letting the memories of that road trip flood back. The laughter, the conversations, the promise to make this trip one to remember. As he sat there, lost in thought, his mind drifted to Emily. He wondered if she would ever come back to visit, if they would ever have another chance to reconnect, to share another moment like the ones they had on the trip. The years had passed, and life had taken them in different directions, but deep down, Daniel still held on to the hope that one day, things would come full circle. The next day, Daniel decided to take the Impala out for a drive, just like the old days. He didn't have anywhere specific to go, he just needed to feel the road beneath him again. As he drove through the familiar streets, past the places he and Emily had once visited, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Time had moved on, and he couldn't bring back the past. but he could still hold on to the memories. And as he drove, he promised himself that he would never forget the bond he shared with Emily, even if their lives had taken them in different directions. It was 2019 when Emily received the news. Her father, Daniel, had passed away. The call came unexpectedly, a sudden wave of emotion that overwhelmed her as she stood in her small apartment, holding the phone to her ear. The world around her seemed to freeze for a moment as she processed the words. It had been years since her last visit, and now she found herself grappling with the fact that her father was gone. The sadness was not just for the loss of him, but for the distance that had grown between them over the years, the missed calls, the unspoken words, the time that could never be reclaimed. Her mind raced through memories of the past, the road trip they had taken together, the conversations they had shared, the way he had always tried to protect her and guide her, even when she hadn't fully appreciated it. She realized, as the weight of the news settled in, that she had never fully understood the sacrifices he had made for her. She had been so caught up in her own world, so focused on her own dreams, that she hadn't seen the little things he had done to make sure she had everything she needed. And now, he was gone. After the funeral and the necessary arrangements, Emily made her way back to her childhood home. The house was quiet, filled with the echoes of a life once lived. It felt strange to be back in the place she had once called home, but everything had changed. The house, now empty of her father's presence, felt like a shell. She wandered through the rooms, each one carrying a memory, some good, some bittersweet. Her eyes landed on the old family photos hanging on the walls, pictures of her father at different stages of his life, smiling, working, and always there for her. And yet, there was a distance she hadn't noticed before. It was as if time had stolen moments from them both, leaving them with only the shadows of what once was. She didn't expect to find anything that would help her make sense of it all, but something caught her eye. As she went through the garage, sifting through boxes of her father's old belongings, she stumbled upon a dusty journal. The pages were yellowed with age, but the handwriting was still legible. She opened it carefully, wondering what it might hold. The first few pages were filled with mundane details, work schedules, shopping lists, and notes about repairs that needed to be done around the house. But then, as she flipped further, she came across something that made her heart skip a beat. There, among the pages, was a detailed account of their road trip, the one they had taken so many years ago. Daniel had written about the places they had visited, the things they had talked about, and the way he felt during those days. She read his words slowly, each sentence pulling her back in time. He had written about how much he had cherished their time together, how important that trip had been for him. He talked about the bond they had shared and how it had made him feel closer to her than ever before. But there was more. Daniel had also written about a promise he had made during that trip, one that Emily had long forgotten. It was the joke about burying the car. The idea had seemed ridiculous at the time, just another one of those random thoughts her father had shared to entertain her. But in the journal, Daniel had written that he had meant it. He had talked about burying the car as a way to mark the memory, to create something lasting. It had been a playful suggestion back then, but to him, it had become something more. It was a way to hold on to the past, to keep a piece of their adventure alive, even after everything else had changed. Emily couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion as she read her father's words. It was as if he had been speaking directly to her, sharing his feelings and thoughts in a way he never had before. She hadn't realized just how much that trip had meant to him. And now, reading these words, she felt a deep sense of regret for not having fully understood it at the time. It was too late to tell him how much she had appreciated him, how much she had come to understand him, but it wasn't too late to honor his memory. The journal also contained a map, one that Daniel had drawn, marking the places they had visited, and in the corner a small X where he had mentioned that the car was buried. Emily's heart raced as she looked at the map. She had no idea what to expect, but something in her told her that she needed to go back, to retrace the steps of their journey and find the place where the Impala had been buried all those years ago. She decided with a sense of purpose that she would do just that. She would find the car, honor the memory of their road trip, and in doing so, reconnect with her father in a way she never had the chance to do before. It wasn't just about the car. It was about what the car represented. The time they had spent together, the bond they had shared, and the love that had existed between them, even if it had been left unspoken for so many years. The following weekend, Emily set out on the journey, driving the same route her father had taken all those years ago. The landscape had changed in some places, but in others, it felt oddly familiar. She passed through small towns, rolling fields, and wide open spaces, all the while feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and grief. The road seemed to stretch on forever, just like it had during their trip. She remembered how they had talked and laughed, how the miles had melted away as they moved from one place to the next. But now it was just her, retracing her father's steps, looking for the place that had been marked with such significance in his journal. She followed the map carefully, her eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of the location her father had marked. After several hours of driving, she reached a quiet, remote area far from the nearest town. The land here was open and vast, with tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. The air was still, and the silence felt both peaceful and unsettling. She parked the car and stepped out, feeling the weight of her father's memory pressing down on her. She looked around, taking in the quiet beauty of the place, and then began to search. It didn't take long before she found it, the spot her father had marked on the map. There, buried beneath the earth, was the Impala. The car, now rusted and decaying, was almost unrecognizable, but it was still there, just as her father had promised. It felt surreal to stand there, knowing that so many years had passed since that road trip, since the day they had joked about burying the car. But here it was, a piece of their shared history, hidden away in the earth, waiting to be found. As Emily stood there, she realized something. The car wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a symbol of the love, the bond, and the connection they had shared. It was a reminder that, no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much distance had grown between them, her father's love had never faded. He had left this piece of himself behind, a tangible memory for her to hold on to. And now it was her turn to honor that memory, to remember the road trip, and to carry forward the lessons her father had taught her. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape, Emily sat on the hood of the Impala, reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. She thought about the road trip, about how it had shaped their relationship, and about how much she had learned about herself and her father along the way. And though the car was no longer what it once was, its presence, buried in the earth, felt like the closing of a chapter. But it wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, a new way for Emily to carry her father's memory forward, to honor their time together, and to keep the lessons of their journey alive in her heart. Emily sat on the hood of the old Impala, the sun beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the land. She had spent the last few hours just sitting there, reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. The discovery of the buried car, the memories of the road trip, and the quiet reflection of her father's life had all come rushing back to her in waves. It was as if the years of distance between them had dissolved in this one quiet moment. Her heart was heavy, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of peace. Her father was gone, but his memory, the love they shared, and the lessons he had taught her were alive in this moment. The Impala, buried in the ground for nearly 3 decades, now stood as a symbol of their shared history. The car, which had once carried them on an adventure filled with laughter and connection, was now just a rusted, decaying shell of its former self. Yet in a strange way, it felt as if it still held the essence of everything they had experienced together. The bond, the conversations, and the quiet love that had been shared on that long-ago road trip. Emily traced her fingers over the old metal, feeling the texture of the rust beneath her hand. It was hard to believe that this car had once been so full of life, carrying them both on a journey they would never forget. The years had passed and life had moved on, but the car, in its own quiet way, had preserved that moment in time. It had held on to the memories, even when everything else had changed. Emily smiled softly to herself. In a way, her father had been right. The car was more than just a vehicle. It was a marker of something deeper, something that had outlasted time. She stood up from the hood of the car and took a step back, her eyes scanning the surrounding landscape. The place was so quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of the wind through the grass. It was peaceful here, far from the noise and distractions of the world. This had been the spot her father had chosen, the place he had marked on the map with such significance. She could almost hear his voice in her head, telling her about the promise he had made during that road trip all those years ago. She could hear him laughing, joking about how they would bury the car to leave a piece of themselves behind, never realizing that the car would become a much more meaningful symbol than either of them had imagined. As Emily stood there, her mind wandered back to the road trip itself, the long hours on the highway, the quiet conversations, and the moments of connection they had shared. She remembered how they had talked about the future, about the places they wanted to visit, and about the dreams they had for their lives. It was a time before everything got complicated, before the world began to pull them in different directions. It was a time when all that mattered was the journey, and the bond they shared was enough to hold them together. She had taken those moments for granted at the time. She hadn't fully understood what they meant, not until now. Her father had always been there for her, quietly supporting her, even when she didn't realize it. He had worked hard to give her everything she needed, and yet he had never asked for anything in return. He had wanted to show her the world, to let her see that there was more to life than just the everyday grind. And now, in this quiet moment, Emily realized just how much she had missed by not fully appreciating him when she had the chance. The road trip had been a gift, one she hadn't fully understood at the time. But now, standing here beside the buried Impala, she could see just how important it had been, not just for her, but for her father as well. It was a chance for them to connect in a way that they hadn't before, a chance for them to share something special, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. And even though they hadn't known it at the time, that trip had been a way for them to say goodbye without saying the words. Emily knew that she couldn't change the past. She couldn't go back and relive those moments with her father, and she couldn't undo the years of distance that had come between them. But she could honor the memory of the trip, of the bond they had shared, and of the love her father had given her. And she knew that, in doing so, she could carry his memory forward, not just in her heart, but in the way she lived her life. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, and looked down at the car once more. It was time to say goodbye, to let go of the past and move forward. But as she stood there, she realized that she wasn't really saying goodbye. She was simply acknowledging what had been and accepting that it was part of her story. Her father's love would never fade, and the lessons he had taught her would stay with her for the rest of her life. As the sky darkened, Emily turned away from the car and began to walk back to the Impala she had driven to the site. The journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with its own challenges and rewards. But now, with the weight of the past lifted, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. Her father had shown her the importance of living in the moment, of cherishing the time spent with the people you loved, and of never taking those moments for granted. As she drove away from the burial site, the Impala's headlights cutting through the darkening landscape, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had found closure, but she had also found something more. She had found a way to carry her father's memory with her, to honor the bond they had shared, and to keep it alive in the way she lived her life. The road trip had been more than just a journey. It had been a lesson in love, in connection, and in the importance of never letting go of the things that truly matter. And as she drove down the road, heading toward the future, Emily smiled, knowing that her father was still with her, in the memories they had created and in the lessons he had passed down to her. She didn't need the car or the buried symbol of the past to keep him alive. He would live on in her heart, in the choices she made, and in the way she embraced life's journey.